It was a late evening when she finally returned to her small apartment after a long day at work. The streets outside were slick from a sudden rain, and the city seemed quieter than usual, almost as if it was holding its breath. She had been looking forward to a simple night at home, the kind where she could finally breathe without meetings, deadlines, or endless emails pressing on her mind. She set down her bag, kicked off her shoes, and poured herself a cup of tea. The aroma of chamomile filled the kitchen, calming her for a brief moment before she could fully relax. She had just settled into her favorite chair by the window, gazing at the reflections of neon signs on the wet streets, when a sudden knock at her door startled her. It was unusual for anyone to visit her apartment, especially at this hour. Cautious but curious, she walked over and peeked through the peephole. Standing outside was a man, drenched from head to toe, with a small child clinging to his side. The rain ran down his coat in dark streaks, and the little boy's hair was plastered to his forehead. Her first instinct was to hesitate. She was careful about strangers. Yet something in the way the man held the child, the weariness in his posture, and the helpless look in his eyes, made her pause. It was not a demand, not a threat. It was a silent plea. She opened the door slightly, careful to keep a hand near the latch, and asked if they needed help. The man's voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you. My car broke down, and there's nowhere for us to stay tonight. I didn't know where else to go." His words were simple, but they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. The child, holding on to his hand, looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes, and she felt an unexpected tug at her heart. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "All right," she said, "but just for tonight. You can't stay longer than that." Relief washed over the man's face. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost as if saying it aloud gave him strength. He stepped inside carefully, the child following closely, their small hands leaving wet marks on the floor. She quickly grabbed some towels and handed them to them. They dried off in silence, the room filling with the faint scent of wet clothes and rain. The child was shy at first, hiding behind his father's leg, but she knelt down to his level and smiled gently. "Hi there. I'm glad you're here. Do you want to come see the kitchen?" she asked. The little boy hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She led him to the small table she had set up for dinner. He looked around with curious eyes, taking in the small apartment that felt so different from the life he was used to. While the child explored, the man sank into a chair, running his hands through his damp hair. She offered him a hot cup of tea, which he accepted gratefully, blowing on it before taking a sip. "It's been a long day," he admitted. "I didn't expect. I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing," she said. "It's just one night. You'll figure out the rest tomorrow." She watched him for a moment, noticing the fine lines of exhaustion on his face, the way his eyes seemed older than his years. There was something about him that seemed quietly strong, yet vulnerable at the same time. They settled into an awkward rhythm at first. She cooked a simple meal, pasta with tomato sauce. Nothing fancy, but warm and comforting. The child sat at the table, poking at the food cautiously, while the father ate quickly, as if trying to make up for the long day they had endured. She kept the conversation light, asking about their journey, the city, and small things that might make them feel at ease. The man shared fragments of his life, speaking carefully, choosing his words as if measuring them. He was a single father, raising his child alone, working long hours to make ends meet. There was no bitterness in his tone, only a quiet determination. He spoke about the challenges, the long nights, the moments when it felt impossible to keep going, but also about the small victories: a child's laughter, a kind gesture from a stranger, the feeling of making it through another day. She listened, intrigued and moved. She realized how little she knew about struggles outside her world of corporate deadlines and office politics. Here was someone who faced real challenges, who bore responsibility not just for himself but for another life entirely. She felt a growing respect for him, and at the same time, a small warmth toward the child, who reminded her of a world she often overlooked in her pursuit of career success. After dinner, she cleared the table while the father and son settled in the living room. She had put out blankets on the sofa, enough for them to rest comfortably. The child snuggled close to his father, eyes heavy with sleep. She glanced at them and felt a strange mixture of emotions: empathy, admiration, and an unexpected sense of connection that she couldn't explain. Before heading to her own room, she checked in on them. "I'll leave the lights on just in case you need anything," she said softly. The man nodded, offering a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means," he replied. She nodded, feeling the weight of those words more than she could express. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she found herself thinking about the man and the child. The city outside was quiet now, the rain having stopped, leaving a fresh, clean smell in the air. She couldn't sleep at first, her mind replaying the simple moments of the evening: the child's shy smile, the man's tired but sincere gaze, the quiet conversations over a meal. There was something deeply human about it, something that felt important in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. She realized that life had a way of reminding people of what really mattered. Here she was, caught up in her own busy world. Yet a simple act of kindness, letting a stranger stay for one night, had created a ripple she hadn't anticipated. It was not about heroism or grand gestures, but about being present, noticing someone else's need, and acting with compassion. Meanwhile, in the other room, the father lay awake as well. He had been cautious at first, unsure of what to expect from a stranger, but her kindness, her calm presence, had made him feel safe in a world that often felt unforgiving. He thought about how rare it was to encounter someone who didn't judge, who simply offered help without expecting anything in return. It was a small act, but it had given him a moment of relief, a moment to breathe, and to feel human again. The child stirred in his sleep, mumbling softly, and the father gently adjusted the blanket around him. He thought about the future, the uncertainty, the responsibilities, the long hours of work ahead, but for the first time that evening, he felt a small flicker of hope. Sometimes even a stranger's kindness could make a difference, even if just for one night. The night passed quietly. There were no dramatic events, no sudden twists, just the soft rhythm of sleep, rain-washed streets, and the quiet hum of a city settling down. Yet in that ordinary night, something extraordinary had happened. Connections had been made. Trust had been extended, and a small act of humanity had created a bond that neither of them would forget. Morning arrived slowly. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. The child woke first, rubbing his eyes, and the father followed shortly after. They moved quietly, trying not to disturb her. She was already up, preparing a simple breakfast. There was no awkwardness, only a quiet understanding. They had shared something real, something that didn't need words to explain. As they ate, they spoke in small, gentle tones. The father thanked her again, and she smiled, brushing off his gratitude as if it were nothing. But inside she knew that it had meant something to him, to his child, and even to her. Sometimes, she realized, the smallest choices could have the most profound effects by the time they were ready to leave. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the city sparkling in the morning light. She walked them to the door, carrying a small bag of snacks and water for their journey. The child hugged her tightly, whispering a soft thank you before running off with his father. She watched them go, a mix of relief and sadness in her chest. It was only one night, but it had been enough to change something in both of their lives. She returned to her apartment, the quiet returning, but her mind lingered on the encounter. There was a sense of fulfillment, a feeling that, even in a world that often seemed harsh and unfeeling, there were moments of true humanity, moments where people could connect and make a difference, even if just for a single night. And so life resumed. She went back to her routine, carrying with her the memory of that rainy night. The father and child who had entered her life briefly but left a lasting mark. She didn't know if she would ever see them again, but she understood something important. Kindness, even in its smallest form, could ripple through lives in ways no one could predict. That night it started as a random knock on her door. An interruption to her carefully planned evening, but it had become something more. It was a reminder that behind every face, every stranger, there might be a story of struggle, hope, and perseverance. And sometimes, all it took was a willingness to open the door, to listen, and to care. The morning after that rainy night felt unusually bright and calm. The city seemed cleaner, fresher, almost as if it had been washed along with the rain. She moved around her apartment, making coffee and preparing for her usual day. Yet something felt different. The night before had lingered in her mind more than she expected. It wasn't just the memory of opening her door to strangers, but the way that simple act of kindness had felt quiet, human, and deeply satisfying in a way that her busy life rarely offered as she got ready for work. She kept thinking about the father and his child. She remembered the little boy's hesitant smile, the way he had clung to his father, and the man's quiet dignity despite obvious exhaustion. It was rare to meet someone who carried so much responsibility with such patience. She realized that she had judged people in passing, assumed their struggles were simpler than they truly were, and overlooked the quiet resilience that some people displayed every single day. That night had reminded her how much courage ordinary people could have without even realizing it. Meanwhile, father walked down the wet streets with his child in hand. The city was waking up, buses rumbling past, people hurrying to work, and shopkeepers opening their stores. He felt a mix of gratitude and relief for the night he and his son had spent safely under her roof. It was just one night, but it had allowed him to rest, to breathe, and to feel less burdened. In their life, safe moments were rare. A single act of kindness could feel monumental. He thought about her often as they made their way home that day. Her calm presence, her willingness to help without asking for anything in return, it was rare. Most people turned away from strangers or offered pity rather than genuine support. She had treated them like human beings, deserving of comfort and dignity. That image stayed with him, reminding him that there were people in the world willing to extend kindness without expecting repayment. Back at her office, she moved through her day with her usual efficiency. Emails were answered, meetings were attended, and projects reviewed. But every now and then, her mind drifted back to that small apartment, the father and child, and the quiet night they had shared. She found herself wondering about their lives, how they were coping, what their future held. A small concern lingered in her chest, a concern that wasn't anxiety, but a natural human empathy, a curiosity born from connection. Later that afternoon, she found a small note slipped under her door at work. It was from a coworker, just a quick reminder about a meeting. It made her realize how disconnected her life often was from the stories of people outside her immediate circle. She thought about how easy it was to live in her routine and forget that every person on the street had a life full of challenges, triumphs, and struggles. The father and child had reminded her of that human complexity. At home, that evening, she prepared a quiet dinner for herself. She didn't feel lonely, but reflective. She thought about how a single night could shift perspective, how a simple interaction could bring attention to what mattered most: human connection, compassion, and understanding. The world often demanded performance, perfection, and speed, but kindness didn't work that way. It moved slowly, quietly, yet its effects could be lasting. The father, on the other side of the city, spent the evening managing the responsibilities he had to face. Bills needed attention, groceries bought, and preparations made for another day of work. Despite the long hours and fatigue, he kept replaying that night in his mind. It had reminded him of a softer side of life, something beyond survival and responsibility. He had seen care, empathy, and simple generosity that day, and it gave him a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The little boy, too, remembered her warmth and the way she had smiled at him, the kind of smile that made him feel safe in an unfamiliar place. For children, safety and comfort are everything. That night had been more than just shelter. It had been a place where he could relax, laugh quietly, and feel normal, even if only for a few hours. Over the next few days, both the father and the woman returned to their routines. She threw herself into work, meetings, and projects. Yet a small part of her heart remained aware of the other life she had touched. She would catch herself imagining the child smiling, the father's quiet voice speaking words of gratitude, and she realized she was quietly rooting for them. This gentle concern didn't disrupt her life, but it added a softness to her days, a reminder that even small acts had meaning. The father, though busy, carried a renewed sense of purpose. That night had reminded him why he worked so hard, why he pushed through exhaustion and stress. He thought about how many people probably ignored him or turned away, but she hadn't. She had made him feel seen and valued, not as a burden, but as a human being doing his best. That thought stayed with him through his work, giving him a quiet strength he didn't always recognize in himself. A week passed, and though there was no direct contact between them, both thought about that night frequently. The city carried on around them, filled with routine and noise, but both had been changed by a small encounter. It was the kind of moment that reminded people how connected lives could be, how acts of kindness created ripples in ways they might never fully see. She found herself sharing the story with close friends in small ways, careful not to reveal too much, but expressing the quiet joy of being able to help someone unexpectedly. Her friends listened, impressed by her generosity, but she didn't see it as heroism. She saw it as simply being human, noticing someone else's need, and responding with compassion. That understanding, she realized, was the real value of that night. The father also found himself speaking about the encounter, though sparingly. He told the child how fortunate they had been to meet someone who had offered comfort without judgment, someone who had reminded them that there were people in the world who cared. The little boy listened with wide eyes, slowly learning that the world could be harsh, but also kind in unexpected ways. It was a lesson he would carry with him as he grew. Life went on, but the connection formed that night remained in subtle ways. She continued her work with renewed clarity, occasionally reflecting on the human element in her business decisions, the understanding that behind every client, employee, or colleague was a life full of challenges, hopes, and feelings. The father approached his work and life with a similar renewed perspective, understanding that even in struggle, small acts of kindness mattered immensely. One evening, while she sat at her kitchen table preparing notes for an upcoming presentation, she paused, looking at the rain-soaked streets outside her window. She thought about the father and child walking home that morning, how their lives had been touched, if only slightly, by her willingness to open her door. It reminded her that life wasn't only about achievements, deadlines, or personal goals. It was also about noticing the people around her and responding with care. For him, the father, every day after that night carried a subtle but meaningful change. When faced with challenges or moments of stress, he recalled her quiet strength, her calm approach, and it gave him reassurance that he could face difficulties without losing his humanity. The small kindness had become a source of inspiration, something tangible that reminded him that even small gestures could leave lasting impressions, even in ordinary moments. They both carried memories of that night. She remembered the soft glow of her apartment lights, the smell of wet coats, the shy curiosity of the child, and the quiet relief in the father's expression. He remembered her smile, the comfort she offered without judgment, and the safe space she had provided. Those memories were ordinary, yet extraordinary. Everyday human interactions that left lasting impressions on their hearts. As the days turned into weeks, she occasionally wondered if she would ever see them again. She didn't know their names fully, didn't know their lives beyond what had been shared in that brief time, but she held on to the memory with care. It reminded her that life was full of unexpected encounters, moments where choices, even small ones, could shape experiences in profound ways. The father, too, held on to that night as he navigated the challenges of single parenthood. It was a reminder that, despite the struggles, moments of human kindness existed, that they could be touched by people who acted not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. It gave him hope that his own efforts mattered. That life was not solely about hardships, but also about small joys and connections. The little boy, though too young to fully understand, had learned that strangers could sometimes be friends, that safety and comfort could appear in unexpected places, and that the world, despite its challenges, had spaces of warmth and kindness. It was a quiet lesson, woven into his memory, shaping how he would perceive the world around him. That simple night had created a subtle shift in all their lives. Though ordinary in appearance, it carried extraordinary meaning. It was a reminder that human connection wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, unnoticed by the larger world, yet powerful in its ability to inspire hope, courage, and gratitude. And so, life continued. Work resumed, routines were followed, and the city moved on with its usual rhythm. Yet, the night they had shared remained a touchstone, a story of empathy and understanding that neither would forget. It was the kind of memory that could surface unexpectedly, bringing a smile, a sigh, or a quiet sense of gratitude. They had shared nothing more than food, shelter, and conversation, yet those simple acts had left a lasting impression. It was proof that human connection mattered, that acts of care could ripple through lives in ways one could never predict. They had each walked into that night as strangers, but they left it changed, carrying a part of each other with them in small, meaningful ways. And as she prepared for the next day, and as he navigated the challenges awaiting him, both understood something quietly profound. The world could be a place of struggle, but it could also be a place of kindness, hope, and unexpected connection. That night had shown them the power of human care, a lesson that would continue to influence them long after the rain had stopped and the city had returned to its normal rhythm. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle back into its usual rhythm for both of them. The city moved at its relentless pace. People hurried along the streets, and routines demanded attention. She returned fully to her work, managing her team, attending meetings, and making important decisions. Her life had its usual order, yet there was a subtle change in the way she approached her days. That night, the night she had opened her door to a stranger and his child, had left a quiet imprint on her heart. She found herself noticing small details that she might have overlooked before. When a colleague seemed stressed, she offered a listening ear. When she passed someone struggling on the street, she paused a little longer, considering whether she could offer help. The world often demanded efficiency, but she began to understand that efficiency without humanity could feel empty. That simple act of kindness from weeks ago had reminded her that being human was about noticing others and acting with compassion. Meanwhile, the father continued with the daily challenges of single parenthood. Work, childcare, and household responsibilities filled his days, leaving little room for rest or personal time. Yet he carried the memory of that night with him, like a small flame of reassurance. The woman's kindness had reminded him that there were people in the world who acted with genuine care, people who believed in the goodness of strangers. That thought gave him strength, a quiet courage to face the long days ahead. His child was growing more comfortable in routines, learning to navigate school, friendships, and daily life. The father watched him carefully, noticing how the smallest gestures, a smile, a word of encouragement, a shared laugh, shaped the boy's confidence and happiness. That night in her apartment had been one of the rare moments where the child felt safe and cared for in a different environment. And the father often reflected on how important those small experiences were in building his son's sense of security. For her, the memory of that night would surface unexpectedly. She would recall the child's quiet laughter while coloring at the kitchen table, the father's tired but sincere expression as he accepted her help, and the stillness of the apartment, filled with rain-soaked quiet. These recollections weren't accompanied by longing or regret, but by a deep sense of warmth and human connection. They reminded her that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions on hearts and minds. One afternoon, while reviewing a proposal in her office, she caught herself thinking about the father's calm demeanor and the way he had carried himself with dignity despite exhaustion. She realized that the qualities she admired in him, patience, resilience, and quiet strength, were rare and valuable. It struck her that life often brought people together in unexpected ways, and these encounters could teach lessons that no book or lecture ever could. At the same time, the father faced moments of exhaustion that tested his patience and resolve. Bills piled up, deadlines loomed, and the pressure of providing for his child never truly faded. Yet every time he felt overwhelmed, he would recall the woman's quiet generosity and the simple act of being welcomed into her home. It wasn't about gratitude alone. It was about hope, a belief that people could act kindly even in a world that often seemed indifferent. One weekend, the woman decided to take a walk in the park near her apartment. The air was crisp and sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gentle shadows on the ground. She thought about the father and child, wondering how they were managing. She realized that, even though she hadn't seen them since that night, the bond formed in a brief moment had created a connection she could not easily shake. It reminded her that every person she met carried their own struggles, victories, and stories. The father and his child also found small moments of peace in their life. They went to the park near their home, played in the sandbox, and watched birds in the trees. The child laughed freely, his worries forgotten for a short while, and the father felt a sense of fulfillment that work alone could never bring. He remembered how the woman had made them feel safe and welcomed, and he silently hoped that someday he could repay that kindness in some way, even if only by passing it on to someone else in need. One evening, she attended a small dinner with close friends, and the conversation turned to life's unexpected challenges. She spoke in general terms about helping a stranger, not revealing too much, but her words carried sincerity. Her friends listened, some nodding in agreement, others reflecting on their own experiences. She realized that sharing even small acts of kindness inspired others to consider how they could act compassionately. Her experience had not only touched her life, but could ripple outward through those she shared it with. The father, after a long day at work, sat with his son in their modest living room. They talked about school, dreams, and small adventures they hoped to have. The memory of the woman's apartment, the quiet warmth, the simple care would occasionally surface in their conversation. "Remember that night when we stayed at that kind lady's place?" he asked his son one evening. The child nodded, recalling the safety and comfort he had felt. "I want to be that kind too," he said softly. The father smiled. Realizing that the lessons of kindness could pass from generation to generation, life continued with its usual unpredictability. For her work remained demanding, but she had a renewed perspective. She considered the human element in every interaction. Understanding that behind every decision, every project, and every meeting were people with lives, struggles, and emotions. The night she had opened her door had reminded her that empathy was not a weakness but a strength, something that made her better not only as a person but also as a leader. The father faced his own challenges daily, balancing work, childcare, and personal needs. 8. But the memory of that night served as a quiet reminder that the world contained pockets of goodness. It was not always obvious, and it was not always easy to find, but it existed, and it could sustain people even in the hardest times. He thought about how important it was to notice these moments, to hold on to them, and to allow them to guide his actions. Meanwhile, she found herself occasionally imagining the father and child navigating their lives. She hoped they were safe, happy, and finding small joys amidst their struggles. It was not a longing for recognition or continued involvement, but a simple human care for people she had once helped. A care reminded her that the impact of her actions, even small ones, could extend far beyond the immediate moment. The father, too, reflected on her impact. That night had been brief, almost ordinary on the surface, but it had reminded him that kindness could come unexpectedly and without expectation. He realized that life often moved so quickly that people rarely noticed the simple opportunities to make a difference. That night had been a pause, a quiet space where humanity was visible, and it had reminded him that he was not alone in navigating the difficulties of life. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life continued. She attended meetings, worked late into the evenings, and handled challenges that came her way. Yet the memory of the father and child remained a quiet presence, a reminder that human connection was what gave life its depth and meaning. She noticed small acts of kindness around her more readily, a colleague helping another without expectation, a stranger holding a door, a smile shared between two people who did not know each other. These small moments resonated more deeply because of her experience that night. The father and child, meanwhile, continued to face challenges, but they also found small victories. A project at work succeeded, a school assignment went well, a quiet evening together brought laughter and peace. In all these moments, the memory of that woman's kindness was a touchstone, a reminder that the world could be gentle and generous even when it seemed otherwise. It inspired him to act with care toward others, to notice the small needs around him, and to extend help wherever he could. One quiet evening, as she prepared for bed, she thought about the unpredictability of life. She realized that moments of human connection could arrive when least expected, that people could appear in your life briefly and leave a lasting impression. She smiled softly, thinking about the father and child, hoping that their days were filled with small joys, safety, and comfort. That night had been ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in its quiet impact. The father sat by the window in their small apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. He held his child close, reflecting on the night they had spent in her apartment. It had been a short, unremarkable evening in terms of events, but it had reminded him of the goodness that still existed in the world. That memory carried him forward, giving him the courage to face challenges and the motivation to act with care in his own life, even in ordinary routines. Both carried the weight of that night in subtle ways. It shaped their understanding of human connection, compassion, and empathy. They had shared only a few hours together, yet the experience had altered their perspective, leaving a quiet but meaningful impact on their hearts and minds. The father learned that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward, influencing lives in ways unseen, while she learned that noticing and responding to the needs of others could deepen her own humanity. In the end, life continued with its ups and downs, challenges and triumphs. Yet, the memory of that night remained a touchstone, a quiet reminder of the power of empathy, the importance of human connection, and the unexpected ways that simple gestures could change lives. It was proof that even brief encounters could leave lasting marks, shaping perspectives, inspiring hope, and reminding people of the goodness that existed in the world. And so, the father and child walked forward through their lives with renewed courage and understanding, while she moved through her own days with a heightened awareness of the human stories around her. They had shared nothing but time, warmth, and simple care. That was enough to change the way they saw the world and the way they lived within it. That small, ordinary night had become extraordinary in its impact, leaving behind lessons of compassion, resilience, and hope that would continue to guide them in the days and weeks to come. It had been months since that rainy night, when she had opened her door to a stranger and his child. Life had moved on in its usual rhythm, filled with work, responsibilities, and the quiet routines that seemed to define her days. Yet, despite the busyness, there had always been a small part of her mind that lingered on that brief encounter. She had thought about them often, the father, the child, the quiet humanity that had been so present in her apartment that night. She wondered how they were doing, whether they were safe, whether life had been a little easier because of that small gesture. Her office was bustling that morning. Meetings, calls, and deadlines demanded her attention, but there was an undercurrent of excitement she could not ignore. A new deal was on the table, and the company was preparing for a meeting that could change everything. As she reviewed the agenda and finalized her notes, she did not yet know that life was about to take an unexpected turn. The door to her office opened, and in walked a man. He carried himself with confidence, calm, authority, and an ease that only came from experience. He looked around, observing the space as if he were taking it all in, and then his eyes met hers. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Recognition sparked quietly in the room, a connection that had been dormant for months but was now undeniable. It was him, the man from that rainy night, the father who had come to her apartment seeking shelter. But now he was not the tired, worn figure she remembered. He was someone transformed, someone accomplished, someone in charge. He smiled, and there was a warmth in his expression that immediately reminded her of that night. "Hello," he said, his voice calm and steady. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled back. Realizing that she had not imagined the memory, it was real, and here he was, standing in her office. No longer just a stranger, he extended his hand and she shook it, feeling the quiet strength and assurance that radiated from him. There was a brief pause, a mutual acknowledgement of the shared history that neither had forgotten. "I don't know if you remember me," he said, "but you helped us that night. You let us stay in your apartment when we had nowhere else to go. I wanted to thank you properly." Her heart softened, and she nodded, words catching in her throat for a moment. "I remember," she said softly. It was just one night. I'm glad you're okay, he smiled. A mixture of gratitude and something else. Pride, perhaps, or quiet accomplishment. We are more than okay, he said. Life has changed a lot since then, and a lot of it is because we had that small reminder that people care, that kindness exists. That night made a bigger difference than you might realize. She gestured to the chairs in front of her desk. Please, have a seat, she said. I assume you're here for the meeting? Yes, he replied. I just arrived as the new CEO of the company involved in this deal. Her eyes widened slightly. The man she had helped, the single father she had seen at his most vulnerable, was now the CEO of the company she was negotiating with. It was a twist she had never expected, a collision of past and present in a way that felt almost surreal. She quickly composed herself, aware of the professional setting, yet aware as well of the quiet bond that still lingered between them. The meeting began. And despite the professional tone, there was an undercurrent of familiarity. She noticed the careful way he listened, the attentiveness in his gestures, the way he considered every word she spoke. He was sharp, decisive, and calm qualities she had recognized in a different way on that rainy night. When he had handled his child's needs with patience and care despite exhaustion, it was the same man, yet so different. And the realization struck her deeply. During the discussion, she found herself more focused than usual, aware of the human story behind the negotiations. It was no longer just about contracts, numbers, and projections. It was about people, about trust, about respect. Every time he spoke, there was a quiet integrity that resonated with her, a sense that decisions were made not just for profit, but with thoughtfulness and responsibility. It reminded her of the father she had helped, the man who carried the weight of his child's life on his shoulders without complaint, with dignity and care at one point. He paused, glanced at her, and said softly, I haven't forgotten that night. It meant a lot to us. You didn't know us, yet you offered help without hesitation. That's rare. Gosh. She felt a wave of emotion she tried to suppress in the professional setting. I just did what I could, she replied. It wasn't anything extraordinary. It was extraordinary to us, he said quietly. It reminded us that there are people who care, and it gave us the strength to keep moving forward when life felt impossible. The words hung in the room, soft, yet powerful. She realized that her small act of kindness had carried meaning far beyond what she could have imagined. It was a reminder that the choices people make, even in small moments, can ripple through lives in ways they may never fully understand. That night, the memory, the care, the humanity she had extended had become a part of a story that was still unfolding. As the meeting progressed, business discussions were handled with precision. Agreements were made and plans were finalized. Yet, beneath the formalities, there was a quiet acknowledgement of shared history, an unspoken respect that deepened the interaction. The father, now CEO, demonstrated the same thoughtfulness and integrity that she had seen in a completely different context months ago. She realized that his growth and success were not only professional, but also deeply human, rooted in experiences that had shaped him and guided his decisions. When the meeting concluded, he rose from his chair and looked at her again. Thank you for everything, he said. Not just for that night, but for reminding us that kindness exists. It gave us hope when we needed it most. She nodded, feeling a warmth that went beyond professional satisfaction. I'm glad it helped, she said softly. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. I hope we can continue to work together not just as colleagues in business, but in a way that values respect, trust, and understanding. That night taught me a lot about people, about life, and I want to carry that forward. She smiled, recognizing the sincerity in his eyes. It was not flattery, not manipulation, but a genuine reflection of the impact of their past encounter. In that moment, she understood that human connection, even fleeting, could create bonds that shaped decisions, perspectives, and relationships in profound ways. As he left the office, she watched him go, a mixture of admiration, surprise, and reflection filling her. She thought about the journey he had taken, from the weary, struggling father she had met that rainy night to the composed, accomplished leader who now walked out of her office with quiet confidence. It was a testament to resilience, determination, and the small yet significant power of kindness for him. Walking through the office that day was both familiar and strange. He remembered her apartment, the warmth, the safety, and the care she had offered. It was a moment he had carried quietly, drawing strength from it, and now in a different context. He was able to show that those values, kindness, respect, and integrity were guiding him in the larger world. He realized that success was not only measured by position or wealth, but by the ability to remain humane, grounded, and connected to the experiences that shaped him. The child, though unaware of the corporate setting, had benefited from the father's resilience and calm strength. The lessons learned from that night, safety, trust, and the quiet reassurance of being cared for, were foundational, giving him confidence to face life's challenges, to grow, and to develop a sense of security that came from both his father and indirectly from a stranger's simple act of generosity. In the days following the meeting, she found herself reflecting on the unpredictability of life, how small moments could lead to extraordinary circumstances, how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, creating connections and opportunities that no one could predict. She realized that the story of that night was not just about giving help, but about the way human lives intersected, influenced, and uplifted each other in quiet, meaningful ways. The father, now back in his own office, thought about how far they had come. The night they had spent in her apartment had been brief, yet it had left a lasting impression. It reminded him that people could act selflessly, that care could be extended without expectation, and that those moments had the power to shape confidence, hope, and resilience. It was a lesson he carried into every decision he made, every interaction he had, and every choice that influenced the lives of those around him. Their paths had crossed in an ordinary, almost incidental way, yet that crossing had changed both of their perspectives. She had learned that small acts mattered deeply, that humanity was expressed in the quiet gestures, and that noticing others could create ripples of positive change. He had learned that kindness could inspire strength, hope, and determination. Carrying forward into every part of life, the world outside moved at its usual pace. Unaware of the quiet story that had unfolded in one apartment on a rainy night, but for them, the story was vivid, alive, and transformative. It was proof that life's unpredictability could bring both challenges and extraordinary opportunities, that moments of empathy and care could grow into profound experiences, and that people could carry the lessons of others into the way they lived, led, and loved, and so life continued. But with a new awareness, she carried the understanding that compassion mattered in ways beyond immediate recognition. He carried the knowledge that kindness could shape paths, decisions, and hearts. Both understood that a single night, a brief encounter, had the power to change lives. And in the unfolding days, weeks, and months, they would continue to witness the quiet, enduring effects of that night. It had started as a simple act, letting a stranger and his child stay for one night. But now, in the office, in the reality of business, in the responsibilities of life, that single act had become a touchstone, a reminder that the human connection, however brief, could inspire influence, transform in ways neither could have predicted. And it was a reminder that sometimes life's most meaningful moments came not from grand gestures, but from quiet, heartfelt choices made when someone needed help the most. The weeks after that unexpected meeting were a strange mix of routine and reflection. She returned to her life, managing her office, overseeing projects, and attending meetings. But the encounter with him, the man she had helped months ago, stayed with her. It was not an obsession or a distraction, but a quiet presence, a reminder of the unpredictability of life and the power of human connection. She noticed things differently now. When someone at work seemed overwhelmed, she would pause to listen or offer help. When a colleague struggled with a task, she would extend patience and understanding, aware that behind every professional facade were lives full of challenges, emotions, and responsibilities. The man's calm authority, his quiet dignity during the meeting, and the respect he had shown for her opinions reminded her that people could grow, transform, and inspire without fanfare. For him, life had also shifted. The promotion to CEO brought new responsibilities, new challenges, and new pressures. But in the quiet moments, he would think back to that rainy night when someone had offered him and his child shelter without hesitation. It had been a brief act, yet it had reminded him that people could care deeply and act selflessly, even when it seemed impossible. That memory had stayed with him, guiding him in moments of doubt, reminding him of the importance of kindness and integrity in every decision he made. He often found himself thinking about her, the way she had spoken softly, the care she had taken to make them comfortable, the warmth she had shown without judgment. It was rare in the world to find someone who offered genuine help simply because it was the right thing to do. That act had given him hope, reassurance, and a quiet courage to continue through challenges that often seemed overwhelming. One evening, she sat at her desk finishing a report, the city lights casting a warm glow through her office window. She thought about the past months, about how life had a way of connecting people in ways they could never predict. The memory of him and his child entering her life on a stormy night brought a small smile to her face. She realized that life's meaningful moments often came quietly, without fanfare, through simple acts of empathy and care at home. She reflected on how brief encounters could leave lasting impressions. A single night, she realized, could be enough to inspire change, offer comfort, and create bonds that endured even across distance and time. It was not about grandeur or recognition. It was about the human connection, about seeing someone struggle and offering what help one could, however small it might seem. That understanding shaped how she approached her life, her work, and her interactions with others. For him, the lessons of that night had influenced more than just his personal reflections. They shaped his leadership. He led with a sense of empathy, remembering that behind every business decision were human lives affected by his choices. He encouraged his team to act with integrity, to treat others with respect, and to recognize the small moments where kindness could make a difference. The memory of that night reminded him that success was not only measured in results, but in the care and consideration shown to others along the way. One afternoon, she received an email from his office. It was an invitation to a meeting, not strictly professional, but to discuss collaboration and shared initiatives. As she read it, a mix of anticipation and curiosity filled her. She wondered what he had planned, and if the past months had deepened the bond that had started with that single night of kindness. She prepared for the meeting, not only focusing on strategy and outcomes, but also on the human element, aware that the foundation of their relationship had been built on empathy and trust. When she arrived at his office, he greeted her warmly, not with formality, but with a sense of recognition and respect. The child was with him, slightly older now, more confident and curious, observing the world around him. Their presence reminded her of the nights and days spent reflecting on small acts of care and the quiet, lasting impact those acts could have. It was a reminder that relationships could grow in unexpected ways, that kindness could create trust and openness, and that human connection could be as important as any business agreement. They began their discussion, balancing professional strategy with mutual understanding. Every decision, every word carried the awareness of shared history. The father, now CEO, demonstrated not only sharp intellect, but also a remarkable attentiveness to her perspective, valuing her input and ideas. She realized that the qualities she had admired months ago, patience, humility, quiet strength, had not only persisted, but had become integral to the way he interacted with the world. During a pause in the discussion, he spoke softly, almost casually. "I want you to know that what you did for us that night wasn't just a kindness in the moment. It shaped the way I think about people, about leadership, and about life. It reminded me that small actions can have big consequences, and that we carry these lessons forward." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "It's amazing how one simple gesture can ripple through lives," she replied. "I didn't realize it would have such an impact, but I'm glad it did." He smiled, a mixture of gratitude and reflection in his eyes. It did, and it reminds me every day to act with care, to notice people, and to offer help when I can. Not because it will be recognized, but because it's the right thing to do. That night gave me that perspective, and I try to carry it forward in every part of my life. The conversation turned back to business, but the tone remained warm, respectful, and genuine. They discussed projects, shared ideas, and explored ways to collaborate, all while maintaining the quiet awareness of the human story that had brought them together. It was a balance of professional focus and personal connection, a reflection of the way life often intertwined both elements in unexpected ways. At the end of the meeting, he walked her to the door. The child waved shyly, a smile breaking across his face. She waved back, feeling a soft warmth in her chest, reminded of the resilience and growth that had come from that single night. The father turned to her, his expression serious yet kind. "Thank you again," he said, "for reminding us of the goodness in the world, for offering shelter when we needed it, and for inspiring me to lead with humanity. That night meant more than I can express." She nodded, her own eyes softening. "I'm glad it helped," she said. "Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference." As she returned to her own office, she reflected on how life worked in mysterious ways. A single act, a brief encounter, had transformed perspectives, created trust, and fostered respect. The ripple effect of kindness had reached far beyond the immediate moment, touching lives, inspiring actions. In shaping the way both of them approached the world, the father returned to his office, thoughtful and reflective. He considered how far they had come, how challenges had been faced, and how kindness had become a guiding principle. That night had been brief, but its lessons endured. He understood that life was unpredictable, that people crossed paths in unexpected ways, and that the choices made in those fleeting moments could shape futures in ways no one could fully foresee. The child, though still young, began to understand the quiet power of empathy. He learned that the world could be kind, that people could care without expecting anything in return, and that moments of safety and comfort could leave lasting impressions. Those early experiences, shaped by the kindness of a stranger, influenced how he interacted with others, how he understood relationships, and how he perceived the world around him. For her, life continued with work, challenges, and responsibilities, but she carried a renewed perspective. She understood that small acts mattered deeply, that human connection was essential, and that empathy and care were not weaknesses, but strengths. Her decisions, interactions, and choices were informed by the knowledge that people's lives were complex, meaningful, and worthy of attention. Months passed, and though the world moved on with its usual speed, the lessons of that night continued to resonate. She and he, connected by a brief encounter, continued to influence each other's lives in subtle, enduring ways. They worked together, shared ideas, and supported each other professionally, all while acknowledging the deeper human bond that had been formed. It was a reminder that relationships were built not only on shared goals, but on respect, trust, and compassion. The child grew more confident, more curious, and more assured in his understanding of the world. He carried the memory of safety, care, and kindness with him, learning the importance of empathy, generosity, and resilience. The lessons from that night, though quiet, shaped his character in ways that would last a lifetime. One quiet evening, she sat at her desk reviewing plans. She paused to reflect on the journey. From a single rainy night to unexpected meetings, professional collaborations, and personal growth, life had shown her the extraordinary impact of ordinary moments. She realized that sometimes life's most profound lessons came not from grand gestures, but from small, meaningful choices made with sincerity and care. For him, the journey was equally profound. That night had been a turning point, a moment of reassurance that human goodness existed even in difficult times. It had guided his decisions, inspired his leadership, and shaped the way he approached his child, his team, and life itself. The act of kindness he had once received became a principle he carried forward, influencing not only his own life, but the lives of those around him. In the end, what began as a single act of compassion, letting a father and child stay for one night, had transformed into something far greater. It had created trust, inspired respect, fostered human connection, and shaped lives in subtle but meaningful ways. It was proof that even brief encounters could ripple outward, leaving lasting impressions, shaping choices, and inspiring the best in people. Life continued, full of challenges, responsibilities, and opportunities. Yet the memory of that night, the bond formed, and the lessons learned remained a constant presence. It was a reminder that kindness mattered, that empathy could transform perspectives, and that human connection, even when fleeting, had the power to change lives in ways that were profound, enduring, and beautiful. And so, both of them, along with the child, moved forward. The world continued around them, full of unpredictability and motion. But the quiet impact of that night remained, a testament to the enduring power of generosity, care, and the human heart. The story of one night had become a story of life, a story of hope, respect, and the remarkable way in which small acts could leave the deepest marks,